Hey everyone, Reed here with Big Strong Book, and today we're going to be talking about Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. This is a book that has been a long time coming for me. I've probably mentioned O'Connor a few times at least on this channel. Starting in high school, we read some of her short stories in our English class, I think. It was AP English Literature. If any of you took that class too, you might have read some of her short stories in there as well. I think the ones that we read were A Good Man is Hard to Find, and Everything That Rises Must Converge. And those two are the two title stories for her short story collections. And then, over the past few years, I've read a few more of her short stories. I have her complete stories collection, and I always love her stuff. It's so in tune. It was in tune to me then, and it's just in line with what I really like to get out of fiction, get out of literature. Um, Cormac McCarthy, William Faulkner, for example, are two of my favorite authors, and you know, she fits into, I mean, not only the kind of fiction that Faulkner and McCarthy wrote, but she fits into the pantheon of great American authors and probably the greatest authors in the English language. Um, the way that she writes, the subjects, her preoccupations with grotesque individuals and extreme uh, bends in a character's will and in what they want out of life, um, is always it's just tremendous. It can be overpowering, and it can be at its best uh, a work of incredible grandeur. I've read many of her short stories, but hadn't really been able to read one of her novels yet. But I read Wise Blood, and it's just as great, if not better, than her short stories that I've read. Just in the way that it's able to, transcend the bounds of what you can feasibly be capable of doing in a short story, and it expands that scope. It expands the power of the work in my mind. That's not to say that her short stories are lacking in something, or they're, running a race and they're one-legged, but it's different. I really feel like you can see the fullness in here in a way. I think that affirmed my feelings with her short stories. So anyway, we'll get into a little bit about what Wise Blood is about. So Wise Blood is almost like a perfect tale for post World War II, and that is the time frame. I had to just look that up to be sure. It's post World War II, set in America, of course, set in the South, as many of her, pretty much all of her works are, I believe. We have Hazel Motes, who, 22 years old, he's coming back from war, coming back from the armed service, the armed service, and he's angry. He wants something. He had this desire almost as a kid to be a preacher. I think because he had seen the resident power within it, but you start to learn along the way that Motes is somebody who wants to repent. He feels like he needs to atone for something, but he feels like he has to do it in his own way. He has to kind of strip the kind of religion that was had of it before, something that speaks to him as a man in his own capability, what he eventually calls the church without Christ. A church that can speak to, in his mind, it seems, to man in its follies and capabilities, but without a divine aspect. But he wrestles with so much. But as he's traveling back through the States, he doesn't really stop over in his hometown, but in another, um, and he encounters this blind preacher, or apparently blind, as we learn not so later, and his daughter, Sabbath Lily. And the preacher, Asa Hawks, is almost pessimistic. He's kind of goading the people on the sides. And Moats tries to one-up him and says, well, I have a church. I have a church. You don't need Jesus. You just, you need, like it is so hard to describe, because he's just like, he's doing it out of a feeling of penance, that he needs penance, but he want penance, but he doesn't feel like he wants, or that there is no outside grace, there is no saving grace, certainly from his point of view, but that he still feels like he must atone, that there is a feeling of unworthiness, but it's kind of runs contrary to literally what he preaches, when he's kind of up on the streets, and he has to do it, of course, he does it in front of a movie theater predominantly, but along the way, or another character, like a 15-year-old kid, Enoch Emery, gets roped in with him. And Enoch is such a fascinating character too. He's this teenager, or this young man. Maybe he's not 15, but a young man who is a degenerate in his own way. He likes to just kind of spy on women at the swimming pool, and he wants women, but he just wants a reward. He wants the reward. So you have Moats, who had the atonement side of it, the penance, perhaps the forgiveness, and then on the other hand, you have Enoch, who wants the reward, the kind of he wants the recognition, the reward that he has done the right thing. Whereas Moats, and what he does, doesn't ever, that's not what he's searching for. It's just such an inward and pained search of something that he ultimately can never attain. And then, of course, they're roped into the preacher and his illegitimate daughter, and we kind of go off from there. And it's a bizarre. I mean, this is such a bizarre head trip almost, but it's so good. And if you know anything about Flannery O'Connor, it's that she is considered to be, in addition to all of the laudatory remarks about that she's one of the greatest of all American authors, she's also noted for her Catholic faith, and the idea of grace and transformation, baptism, reconciliation, or lack thereof. Both sides of those concepts, of those equations, factor heavily all throughout her work. And in here, like, there's a point where Moats, he gets a car, and it's such a ramshackle little car, and he gets stopped by a cop, and he's wanting to, he sees the Jesus died for you billboards on the side of the road and things like that, and he tries not to read it, and he just keeps going. And in his car, this car that he's within, probably representative of the state of mind he is in, the way that he has decided to live his life. It's ramshackle, it's crappy, it's not going to get him anywhere. And then he's pulled over by a cop, and the cop, like, pushes his car into a ditch and just says, well, if you don't have a car, you don't need a license. And like, let me give you a ride back. Where are you going? Nowhere. Even though he is of a mind to preach in a way that he wants to preach his church without Christ. And what's interesting is that, and there also might be a little bit of commentary. Now, this book was published in 1952, I believe, and there's a point in this book that I almost feel like it's O'Connor's view, her negative take on kind of maybe not prosperity gospel, but the kind of popular evangelist sympathies and attitudes that were, at least, World War II era-ish, were just and early television area were just starting. You think of Billy Graham. Maybe Billy Graham's not a great example of prosperity. I mean, I know Billy Graham's not prosperity gospel, I don't think, but you're of that era where you get into the televangelism or the radio evangelism, and through that you get these charismatic figures that you almost want in, and they are the preachers, the prophets, whatever they want to call themselves, that are often have the most material wealth, out of any denomination or something or practice. And you wonder, you start to wonder, are they, what are they in it for? Are they in it for the right reasons or for the wrong? The wrong, of course, being, if you kind of use those platforms to gain great material wealth and gain, when that's the antithesis of the message of the Gospels, of the message of the New Testament, certainly. And there's a moment too where I'm kind of diving into spoilers here, so here on out I'll just kind of talk about everything within this book, where Moats he's preaching, and this guy comes up and he's like, I'm an adherent to the church, to the holy church without Christ, as if the one holy church that can give it kind of the extra oomph it needs, the extra pedigree. And he says, well, you just give me $1. Just give us $1 and you will know the truth. Just give us a little bit. What's $1 against the truth? And eventually and Moats is very angry. He shuts him down. He's like, no. But Moats continues to preach in the same way that they are, but yet he never does it for the money. Later on in the book, of course, when after he blinds himself, he's throwing money away. He's not doing it for the money. He's doing it because he has to atone. He has to. It's like you're reading it. You're like, oh, dude, what are you doing this for? But he criticizes them, and then later, I forget the characters' names off the top of my head, but then you get the point where they kind of make off with a whole bunch of money, and they drive away, and Moats follows them, and he ends up killing one of the guys. He just runs him over in his car, and then the guy says, as he's dying, he just says, Jesus help me, and then he kills him. Moats doesn't want anything to do with mention of Jesus, mention of Christ. He wants to suffer, but he cannot comprehend a figure like Christ or a church organization with Christ at the center. It must be him, because it's his actions. He is suffering only for himself. And there's no caring about others either, in a very weird way. And then just as strange, you get Enoch Emery, who feels that he's a guard at a zoo. He's a guard at a zoo, and then he has a secret. He has what he calls wise blood within him, whether that be his inclinations his moral pattern or whatever that is. But he feels that if he presents that this church without Christ needs its new Jesus. It needs a new Jesus. And so he goes like this like mummified child, this mummified figure in a museum. He breaks in, he takes it out, and he steals it. And then along the way, he goes out in front of a theater where they say that there's going to be this gorilla, but it's not a gorilla, it's a guy in a gorilla costume. And it's almost like Emery needs to interact with something from the natural world or shake its hand, or that in doing so that will give him recognition. But the guy just says, like, essentially, screw you, get out of here, I don't want to see you, like, because he just introduces himself and he's so overwhelmed. And then he gets back to where Moats is living in kind of this like ramshackle, just rundown building, or maybe that's the impression I just got from it, where the preacher, who's again is not blind, but he was cowardly of sorts, and he said he would blind himself, but yet, I mean, that was certainly an act of pride, an act of overzealous confidence when he doesn't actually blind himself, but he pours the lime over his face, but then he runs away. But then he still pretends to be blind, and passes out those like pamphlets and flyers. But when Enoch then presents this mummified figure, and he runs away as if expecting a reward, and then eventually he steals the gorilla costume, and he feels like he must become something else. He doesn't feel the change, so he must bring it on himself. And his reward is then almost to put on his gorilla costume and wander in this forest outside of town. And again, it's just so bizarre. But he feels the need to transcend. He feels that he needs, or transform. He feels the need to have this reward. And he steals this gorilla costume. And eventually, of course, Moats just kind of chucks the mummified thing, and Sabbath Lily thinks that she can heal him. She thinks that she can bring about this, or help this mummified creature or child or whatever that's been dead for who knows how long. But he just throws it out into the rain, and there's a lot of like obviously baptismal overtones in the scene where Enoch meets the guy in the gorilla suit, which is funny because I remember reading it and I'm like, this feels odd. Haven't I read this before? And sure enough, there are a number of chapters within this I learned that are expanded. I don't think they're like word for word some short stories she wrote, but they're at least expanded, and they're given new context within the story. So she took a few of her short stories and from there crafted Wise Blood. It's not like every chapter was a short story and it's like a fix-up novel. It's not like that. But I remember reading that and I'm like, I swear I remember the story of a guy who meets a guy in a gorilla suit, and then he steals the suit, and then he puts on the suit in the forest, and yeah, so that is a short story. But anyway, later on then Moats, after he has failed almost, he blinds himself. He actually does blind himself. And it's almost like he is saved, because then, you know, if he's in a place of almost destitute and frightened wandering after World War II, you know, no safety net, no family, no, there's nothing there for him to kind of to catch him and help him. And of course you might think, well, some people might turn to, maybe not, they wouldn't turn to religion, but that he might, but of course, you know, separating Christ from that, then he won't get that, because he's so vehemently anti at least, religion in its own way. He's very much an individualist, but yet he gets the support. He gets the government support, almost much to his landlady's chagrin and bewilderment at the end when the book shifts to her point of view, when she wants to help him and doesn't understand, you know, why he does the things he does. And she asks him, you know, why don't you preach? She asks him, why don't you preach? You can get like a seeing eye dog, a guide dog. You can go out there. People will love you. People love dogs. Like, people love dogs. And he says, I don't have the time. I don't have the time. And he's blind. And he has nothing but time. But yet he says he doesn't have the time. And he throws his money away that he receives from kind of, begging or whatever on the side of the road. He keeps some of it, but he throws the rest away. And she's like, why don't you give it to, I think I might look at this in the last chapter here, just so I'm referring to it accurately. Yeah, she says, the poor and the needy, don't you ever think about the poor and the needy? If you don't want that money, somebody else might. You can have it. Mr. Motes, she said coldly, I'm not charity yet. She realized now that he was a madman and that he ought to be under the control of a sensible person, where she feels like she can set him right, that he must be under the control of somebody. He must be shown the light, that he can be saved, that he needs somebody or something that can save him, that can redeem him. There's always, with Flannery O'Connor, there's always going to be, whether Catholic undertones or certain just general Christian overtones, undertones, themes, whatever you want to call it, that, it resonates in every aspect of this book, but especially in that ending. His landlady, who herself says she doesn't believe in, she doesn't believe in God, she doesn't believe in Jesus, and she wants him to be saved, but she thinks she can do it herself, that I'll marry him and then I can have him, because then I will essentially be his guardian. I can then commit him to an institution. And then one day he sets out and he's found in a ditch, and and before that too, he had like wrapped barbed wire, like self-mortification, and he was getting thinner and thinner, and he's sick and he's suffering. So he the individualist that says, I'm a man, I can kind of do what I want, but he's so tortured and that he needs to, again, to reconcile himself, but that there's a turn. The blindness doesn't stop that need, that incessant need to be saved, to be exonerated, to be reconciled. But he keeps going. He keeps going because, maybe that's what Flannery O'Connor is saying from her Catholic background, that without grace present in his life, there can be nothing gleaned from it. And so because he is her characters are always individuals, again, bent on these extremes, but he is in this extreme where he must keep going and keep going and keep going, to his end, to his death. And then just the ending where she says that she sees a pinpoint of light within his dark eyes until he was the pinpoint of light. And that's just such a, it's a very disturbing end, in its own way. So yeah, it's an incredible book, an incredible book. It's so dark and extreme in its ways, but even just kind of recounting it now, it's just, the power still hits you, the true power of O'Connor and her works. So yeah, this is a wonderful novel. I would recommend it to anybody. So, Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. If you have read it, let me know what you think of it. And as always, I will see you guys next time.